I'm Dr. Kerry McInerney. Dr. Eleanor Drage and I are the hosts of the Good Robot podcast. Join us as we ask the experts, what is good technology? Is it even possible? And how can feminism help us work towards it? If you want to learn more about today's topic, head over to our website, www.thegoodrobot.co.uk, where we've got a full transcript of the episode and a specially curated reading list by every guest. We love hearing from listeners, so feel free to tweet or email us, and we'd also so appreciate you leaving us a review on the podcast app. But until then, sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode.
In this episode, we talk to British physicist Jess Wade about the 1,923 Wikipedia pages and counting that she's edited in her attempt to put more women and more people of colour onto the online encyclopedia. Again, if you're listening, you can now join us on YouTube, where we have our video recorded podcasts. We hope you enjoy the show.
Thank you so much for joining us here today. We've been really looking forward to the chance to talk to you. And so just to kick us off, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do and what's brought you to the topics of feminism, gender, science, and technology?
Sure. So my name is Jess Wade. I'm a research fellow at Imperial College London, and I look at new materials for electronic devices. So they might be devices like LEDs or photovoltaic solar cells. I'm particularly interested in controlling the shape of those materials and using that to give the devices some new functionality. So they might be able to twist the light they emit or absorb twisted light or even transport spin polarized electrons. So that's kind of my day job. But I also think I have kind of the best job in the world. So it's so fun. You guys know from working in a university how inspiring that is, to be around such bright and excited co-workers, but also the fantastic students we have. I absolutely love studying and working in this field. And I feel like everyone should have the opportunity to be able to do that. And obviously that's not the case. And when you look at subjects like physics or engineering, we have absolutely massive imbalances, both in terms of gender and also ethnicity. They're extraordinarily male-dominated subjects and extraordinarily white subjects, and actually also privilege. There's a lot of these different protected characteristics that come in. So as soon as I realized, A, how fun these subjects were, but kind of B, how uninclusive they were, I was trying to think about ways that I could try and change that. And yeah, I guess I've had a few different thoughts on it kind of throughout my career so far.
Amazing. Your drive and excitement is so wonderful. It's a shame that engineering and maths and physics really funnel through to AI. And so the imbalances in gender and lack of diversity there impacts AI disproportionately.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's more just like, the skills that you get from studying these subjects, even just at high school, computer science, maths, advanced maths, physics, they set you up for so many exciting careers and so many exciting careers where you're really shaping society. And because we do such a terrible job of making sure everyone's involved in that conversation really early on, we have these huge technologies that are created without trying to think about who they're serving. And I think it's a shameful international situation that we've gotten ourselves into.
Totally. So from that perspective then of what the technologies look like, what is good technology to you? Because we often ask people this question, and usually they're philosophers, and they talk about technology in the abstract of what happens when social justice meets technology or why technologies can't be good. But I really like your opinion on it because I think that I really like technology in lots of ways, and I think that something that you use every day is kind of wonderful and can bring new things to your life. So when you're finding new materials or developing different kinds of technologies or structures for technologies, what does good technology look like to you?
I suppose from a kind of very granular perspective and from my day job perspective, I want them to be, sustainable. I don't want the energy budget or the kind of footprint that we use to kind of design and fabricate them to outweigh the benefits you get from using this new technology. So you don't just want to create some extraordinarily bright, wonderful, brilliant screen if it's simultaneously destroying the world because you're mining for particularly rare materials or whatever. So I think that sustainability, low power, thinking about the environment and what we're doing from a material science and a physics and engineering perspective does impact how good I think a technology is. And for people who are listening, I put good in speech marks because I know good isn't a very clear word. But I think beyond that, it's who's been involved with the discussion about designing that technology, the diversity of the team that are in the room who are coming up with it, whether it's a solar panel or, the facial recognition software, who's actually there coming up and having those conversations, and whether it's something society actually needs. Obviously, that would come into that kind of discussion. So thinking about sustainability, thinking about the environmental impact, thinking about who's designing it, and thinking about what the purpose of that technology is. And I guess that we've started to think a lot in the last few years about whether some of these technologies that have been brought in to make our lives more efficient are actually, quote unquote good, whether that is something that is compromising our mental health because of these, huge abilities of these things to draw our attention. So I think it's a really complicated question to say what makes a good technology, but it's a really, really interesting one. And yeah, I think probably has a lot more philosophy in it than it does physics.
I really love that answer though. And I particularly love how you kind of started at the granular and then kind of zoomed out, because I do think this question of sustainability is so crucial when we're thinking about, the costs and benefits and trade-offs of these technologies. And I think it's a really interesting moment right now with ChatGPT and large language models having such a huge public moment right now, while at the same time we know that these large language models are incredibly environmentally costly and use huge amounts of compute power. And so, I think it's a really important corrective to that narrative to say, this exciting new product, is not free in any way. It might seem free to the average user, but there's all kinds of different financial and ecological costs bound into it.
And what comes next, right? How many people lose their job because search stops happening? You don't need a team of people working on search engines if you've got ChatGPT, and the implications of that and all of the layoffs that these huge technology companies have made. If we get to a point where actually you see this and you think about it from an educational perspective and literature and whatever, I'm sure it impacts law and every other aspect of society. If you see it, that net efficiency gains, and actually it's beneficial to reprogram all those people who were working in search, maybe it is a net useful thing and a net good thing, but it's really hard to say. And we get so over enthusiastic and carried away by that first point that I don't think anyone's thinking about the joined up, is it good or not?
There's kind of tech bro podcasts that I occasionally listen to, just for compulsory research. Their emphasis on net gains is really interesting because there's a certainty that an increase in productivity is only a good thing for the global economy, but it's really hard to contest. I think that's one of the things I find most difficult to answer to.
It's really interesting when you think about the future of work as well. Because if you're just producing and endlessly producing more and more and people are getting paid less and less, the idea of retirement for our generation is basically gone. So I just think if you're defined by your productivity and that's the only thing that ever matters and is ever important and that's the only thing that these pros talk about on their podcasts, then it makes the future look pretty bleak. And I don't know if that's a place that we want to be as a society.
Definitely. And I think one of the important reasons why we think it's key to have these kinds of conversations is to say this isn't an inevitability. This is a deliberate choice that, we're making at the moment societally. And so it's really important that we're making that intentionally and with, adequate knowledge and understanding of these systems rather than kind of just being told this is new and really exciting and it's going to be transformative and it's going to make you more productive in all these ways. So yeah, something I'm definitely very passionate about. But I actually want to come back to what you mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, which is that you absolutely love your job and the work that you do in material science, but that you are really distressed and concerned about the fact that a lot of people don't get these opportunities and that there's these huge gender and ethnic gaps when we're thinking about STEM subjects broadly. And so we actually came across you and your work through this fantastic project where you add female scientists to Wikipedia. So could you tell us a little bit about the background to this project? So what gave you the idea and why did you decide to do it?
Yeah, thanks. It's a good question. When I still ask myself, even though I've been doing it for 5 years, I think probably, the build up to it is I'd been doing an awful lot of busy work, going out, public engagement and outreach around physics and science and going to high schools and getting high schools to come to university and going to speak to teachers and parents and thinking, physics is actually super fantastic, even if what you're learning in high school is quite dry, and look at all the great things we're doing. And you realize when you do all of that, you kind of feel great, right? You come away from it feeling like, oh yeah, I'm so inspiring and amazing. And they probably have a nice like lunch hour or whatever. But actually the impact is really tiny. People have been doing this kind of outreach for decades and absolutely nothing's changed from a numbers perspective. And also you're basically preaching to the people who are already going to study science anyway. Anyone in that audience who's quite enthusiastic was probably already going to do it. So you're just going out and talking to them really instead of changing anything. And so I was thinking, how can you connect more with a broader audience? And actually that's where I think parents and particularly non-specialist science teachers are really critical. The number of high schools who don't have a computer scientist, their PE teachers teach coding or their chemistry teacher has to teach physics. Going to connect to those audiences is key, but complicated. And so I started thinking a lot more about the ways people find and access information. Wikipedia is obviously an incredible knowledge sharing platform, completely non-partisan, used by 15 billion, or it gets 15 billion views a month, who pretty much span every sector of society, parents, children, teachers, politicians, journalists, scientists. Everyone uses Wikipedia. Actually, it informs things like Amazon Alexa and Google Home, because when they search for a question, they go to Wikipedia to find the answer. So obviously, if you want to get information to a huge number of people in a really cost-effective way from your laptop at home late at night, editing Wikipedia is a really great way to do that. But Wikipedia, despite feeling complete and being immense in size, has huge content gaps. It's been around since the early 2000s, so it's really beginning of the internet kind of platform. And the majority of people who edit it are white North American men, between 80 and 90%. And they create content about things that they're kind of interested in, right? Like battleships and like weird football clubs and, obscure musicians who played in Tudor courts, but not pages about fantastic women and not pages about fantastic people of color. And so when you look at the statistics of who's on Wikipedia, there's huge holes in who's not there. And invariably that impacts public perception of science and public perception of engineering. If your main go-to point and source of information has this huge inadequacy in who's documented on the sites and who we celebrate, then you think those people aren't there. It's like picking up a history book of science. And in that history book, you'll see a bunch of old privileged white guys. And because that's who history told or celebrated for doing science. And Wikipedia is the contemporary version of that. But the only difference is that we can edit and change Wikipedia. So I guess I hadn't ever really thought about Wikipedia as being biased. I just used it all the time. And then in late 2017, I started thinking a lot more about what's not on Wikipedia and thinking a lot more about how many voices are left out of that conversation. And as a result, we don't celebrate their breakthroughs. We don't teach about them. Parents don't know about them. Kids don't see them. I remember, and probably lots of people listening, you go to look up your high school or your university and you look at who the kind of famous alumni are on there. And they're pretty much always a bunch of really, well-supported, well-connected white men. So I think anything we can do to disrupt or break that cycle is obviously key. And so I started at the beginning of 2018, writing these Wikipedia pages around, I actually started writing around women physicists because I was a woman physicist in the UK. And then you realize very quickly, pretty much every senior woman physicist in the UK is white. And they're all from quite privileged backgrounds. And you're not, you're doing that very white woman feminism that isn't particularly inclusive. So I had to start, really broadening and going to America and writing about crazy things like chemists. But actually, it's given me a really incredible perspective of just how many awesome women scientists and engineers and scientists of color there are, but also these amazing journeys that people go on to be able to have the careers that they really want to pursue, moving continents, moving fields, joining in different industry programs. And so you get that fantastic thing from researching and writing these pages. So I started at the beginning of 2018 and then I just kept going every day since then. And I really love writing Wikipedia pages. I love it because I love learning these things, just like you hosting this podcast. But I also love people getting recognition. I love when, you see someone who, because you've put the time in to get their story on a platform that people actually read, they start to get more acknowledgement and recognition, or it's easier to nominate them for a prize because you've got this nice little biography summary of them already. So it's this beautiful thing. And now I've started going, I have so much momentum, I just can't stop.
I wish I had that much energy. You're totally right. It's those second order effects that are really important as well. It's not just the fact of having a Wikipedia page. It's you can get a recommendation because of it. You can get a promotion. People will know about you. Publishers can reach out via those pages. Or, as Kerry and I discovered when we were interviewing engineers at a big tech firm, they were unaware that the Wikipedia data that they were using to program systems was so skewed towards young white males. And they hadn't thought for a second that it might be biased data, because to them, biased data is data about people. But Wikipedia, of course, is about people. It's totally about people, but not sort of literally in the sense of having people's kind of personal characteristics that they might put at risk, customers' characteristics, for example. So they totally didn't connect biased data and data about people with Wikipedia data.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I think probably you don't, because you think of it as being like an encyclopedia. And why would an encyclopedia be biased? Because it's not a clinical trial or whatever like that. Whereas obviously it's biased because who wrote that encyclopedia? And Wikipedia is this amazing version of an encyclopedia in that it's immediately self-correcting, you know? And I often speak to people who think like, oh, but can you really trust what's on Wikipedia? And actually, if someone's written something that's kind of abjectly false, it gets removed almost instantly. And you have to cite every single thing that you add to Wikipedia because there's so much fastidious editing. So it's actually very verifiable, trustworthy content, which is why all of these downstream places use it, why the tech companies use it, why Google and Amazon and all of their home assistants use it. But actually, despite using that immense amount of data and trusting that data, you don't see those content gaps because they're not going to write about it on the front page of Wikipedia.
And it's so hard to see an absence if you're not already, I think, like attuned to that absence as well. Like, and that's where I think people like you kind of do this really important work, not only in actively working to try and fill those gaps, but like, yeah, showing to people that these gaps exist in the first place. My cousin used to have a game that she used to play, which was she'd just try and find something that wasn't on the internet. And that was her goal. And she'd think of more and more absurd things. So, for example, one of them that she unfortunately found was Temple Run fan fiction. I don't know if you guys remember the game Temple Run, but she was like, that's too much of a niche. And someone had hit that niche. But then I think it's actually very distressing that, you know, we think of the internet as this huge, expansive library of knowledge. And yet, yeah, key places like Wikipedia will be absent kind of the most basic information about women in science and people of color in science.
Yeah, it's so interesting though, because it's not just women in science. I mean, that's my focus because that's like what I do, right? But it's women across all fields. So if of all of the biographies on English language Wikipedia, there are almost 300 language Wikipedias. But on English language, of all the biographies, 19.5% are about women. So it's really not science's issue. It's actually society's issue. It's celebrating and recognizing women, which makes it even a bigger deal, right? And then also you have all of those other challenges in the types of industry that society values. And actually the types of roles that women take on in society are not ones that are necessarily valued. So my brother's fiance is a casting director. Casting directors in films and TV are pretty much the most important part of making a television show or a film work. You know, who's actually in the cast makes the magic happen. They're almost all women. Marvel, James Bond, every single big franchise you can imagine, it's a woman who's the casting director. They get next to no professional recognition. They only just got a BAFTA in 2020. They still don't have an Oscar. And they're absent from Wikipedia because society doesn't deem that notable and important profession, despite it obviously being one. So you've partly got this issue that's unique to science, that science is already sexist and, you know, exclusive. But then you've also got this issue that society itself is really not ready to recognize these professions where women are really active and kind of leading.
Yeah, it must be really telling what's on there and what's not. And you discover more and more things that aren't there, and it tells you more and more things that are excluded from society.
Not valued. And kind of internationally, it's so different. You know, language-wise, you can all imagine, or if you're listening, you can look up a Wikipedia page. Wikipedia pages have this kind of info box on the side, which summarizes key facts about that person. And that would pull out, you know, a PhD thesis, where they went to school, their birthday, if you can find it. And almost all of that information is what populates a Google knowledge panel. So if someone has a Google Knowledge Panel, that's because they've got a Wikipedia page. So it's kind of critical that what's on there is right. But like German language Wikipedia has a particular nuance that only athletes are allowed a knowledge panel, which is just like, why is that a particular thing? Like you see all of these weird little country specific things and language specific things when you get into editing Wikipedia in this way, which is quite fascinating.
Has the response been really crazy? I've seen you on YouTube and on the news and stuff. People really responded to it.
I think in general, no one wanted to talk about it. I was like editing away. I was like just texting my dad, like, here's a cool neurologist. You should know about her or whatever. And then someone from The Guardian, Hannah Devlin, a journalist, came to write about it in 2018 when I really just got started. And then for like a week, everyone in the world wanted to talk about Wikipedia. And then no one spoke to me about it for about 2 more years. I just kept going. And, you know, I train a bunch of people in how to edit. So I have to go actually tonight. I'm helping run a workshop, and particularly to improve content around women's health and abortion on Wikipedia, to improve that kind of information in a bunch of different languages. So I do that kind of activity all the time. And I was doing that in the background. And then suddenly late last year, a journalist decided, oh, now's the time. Let's rerun this story of Jess editing Wikipedia, because I write these Wikipedia pages every day. So the number just goes up, right? And I think the internet needs good things. And the world is such a horrid place that sometimes if you can have a good story on the internet, people go a bit wild for it. I suppose the nice thing that comes from that, you already mentioned it before, but it's this opportunity to kind of discuss bias and discuss representation. Because if someone invites you to teach them how to edit Wikipedia, you invariably have that discussion. But also, people send you such interesting things. You know, they're like, can you write the Wikipedia page of my great aunt? Or like, you know, these incredible kind of contribution. And you get a bunch of weirdos being like, can you write my Wikipedia page? Or men being like, I'll pay you to write my Wikipedia page. And I think beautiful things come from it. I find attention like that really difficult. So when all these funny news companies are like, will you come on the Weather Channel? I'm like, yeah, it's fantastic to get this story out, you know, exactly what this podcast is about. And, you know, that this bias is there and we need to learn about it and acknowledge it before we start to create any kind of technology or platform.
That's so fantastic. And yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine what it must be like to have these kind of waves of like sudden extraordinary interest in your project and then just kind of be ticking along with it and doing this discovery work and doing this platforming work. I was wondering, actually, we've talked a bit about people in passing. I love that story about people emailing you and saying, can you do a page of my great aunt? I was wondering if there were like any stories of individual scientists who you have found or explored in this project who you'd like to tell us a bit about and share with our audience.
I mean, the kind of most fantastic, just for the impact that it had retrospectively after adding a Wikipedia page, is someone called Gladys West. She's a mathematician and she was born in 1930 in Virginia. So she's, you know, over 90 now. And she studied maths at a historically Black college and university, which, you know, I never knew about HBCUs since I started editing Wikipedia, amid my own kind of complete inadequacy in that. So historically Black colleges and universities are in America. North America have a bunch of them, and they're kind of universities that focus on the training of African Americans and other Black members of the American population. They are extraordinarily successful at generating incredibly highly skilled scientists and engineers. If you look at the proportion of Black scientists and engineers who went through those HBCUs as opposed to general American universities and colleges, which obviously recruit a lot more because there are far more of them, it's exceptional. So that they're scenarios where people have recognized inequity, imbalance, and injustice, and they're really thinking in their teaching approach about how you train leaders who can take those on. They're amazing. Anyway, Gladys West went to one. She then ended up working as a maths teacher in a high school before working for the US government on the calculations that enabled GPS. So she did the maths to say how non-perfectly spherical planet Earth was so that you could put satellites around planet Earth and track navigation and provide, you know, Google Maps and everything like that. She is an African-American woman. She must have experienced such extraordinary racism and segregation when she first started working in this role. But put up her Wikipedia page in February 2018 when there was very little about her on the internet. You know, there was no celebration of her. She wasn't winning awards. she was this awesome woman who'd done an incredible thing. And then time had just happened and no one was saying her name. And I wrote her Wikipedia page. I pulled it together. She's very active in her community. As you find that lots of these awesome people are, they're not only awesome in their niche thing, but they're awesome in a bunch of other ways. I wrote her Wikipedia page. By May that year, the BBC had put her in their top 100 women in the world, which means that the number of page views on her page is like popping. Like it was like thousands of page views an hour. And then Everest started covering her. So she was inducted to the US Air Force Hall of Fame at the age of like 89. In 2020, the Guardian wrote a huge article about her. In 2021, the Royal Academy of Engineering in the UK awarded her the Prince Philip Medallion Prize, which had never before gone to a woman, let alone a mathematician in America. So just these extraordinary things happen. The people themselves are extraordinary. Everyone you write about, everyone you discover, the research they do, that's amazing. But actually getting people that recognition, and then finally, then you have to go back and start adding all these awards to a Wikipedia page. That's what I love the most.
That's amazing. It's extraordinary. It does make me feel so sad that we have to participate in these exclusionary forms of documentation in order to kind of reap the rewards of existing in society.
Yeah, it's really hard, isn't it? I think we have to kind of disrupt the system from like all aspects of it. So if there's a really awesome person who it's very hard to prove they're notable, Wikipedia is a general interest encyclopedia. So I can't just write about everyone I think is cool because they have to be of general interest. So, my little dog, he's very sweet, but he's not worthy of a Wikipedia page because despite I think he's of general interest to every other dog lover. But that may not be true. So proving notability is a big aspect of Wikipedia. It's obviously harder to prove women are as notable as their male counterparts because society does such a bad job of telling them that. So how many articles are written about them, how many awards they've won, how many honors they've got. And that's all very biased metric for defining notability. So sometimes you have to kind of break it and nominate people for prizes or write to journalists and say, this would be a fantastic person to cover, or this is a great story, or here's a fantastic name of someone who's an expert in. So you've kind of got both sides of it. You've got the, using Wikipedia to correct this really terrible celebration and recognition that we've had of women and people of color and people from other historically marginalized groups, but also saying, actually, we need to try and fix the other side of it as well, that we have to start recognizing them more in society so it's easier for Jess to write their Wikipedia page.
Yeah, that's really interesting that there's all these other elements. It's not just writing the page. It's advocacy work in many respects. It's kind of the non-technical side of things that you need to do in order to include people online. I wanted to ask what comes next and what do you want to come out of this? You're continuing to teach, right? You teach other people. Do you have other kind of projects around this?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I think I keep editing Wikipedia because I love it, because obviously it's important. And because I'm at like 1,923 pages. So nearly I'll be at 2,000. And that feels like a good milestone that you should get to generally with everything. But I'll keep teaching people to edit. I'm particularly interested in growing other language versions of translating pages out of English. I think, all of these fantastic women scientists that I write about and that other people write about in the world should be aware of them. And actually translating is a huge contribution to Wikipedia that may feel like a less daunting first edit than just creating. So to try and encourage people to translate as much as possible. As I mentioned, I spend a lot of time nominating people for prizes and awards. I think that lots of the big awards that our society starts to really recognize, Fellowship of the Royal Society or just the Royal Society Awards or the Royal Academy of Engineering Awards, they're incredibly important, both for the image of the field, but also in that person's career. So nominating people for prizes and awards, I think, is key. I guess I have other two big things that I'm thinking about a lot, kind of making sure opening access for people early in their careers. I think we do a lot to try and encourage young women to go into these subjects and focus a lot on trying to celebrate these complete legends and pioneers that we have. But actually there's that kind of middle part where there's huge inequity in the types of resource and support people get. And so you have fantastic women and other historically marginalized groups leaving really critical fields. So I'm trying to think more about what what ways we can better support early career people in physics, in materials, in computing, AI, whatever you want. But I think that, working in the types of universities we work in, we have access to a lot of privileged networks that other people don't have access to. So I'm thinking about that a lot. And then, yeah, more creative ways to meaningfully engage young people and their families with this. Because I think the last few years have shown us how important it is to have a scientifically and a technologically literate population. And I don't think our school curriculum is set up to provide that. So we probably need to think more creatively about how we do that. I wrote and I love children's books. I think children's books are a really great way to communicate complex information with children and their families. They have to be quite beautiful, but they can do it. But I think that kind of access is something that really interests me as well, how you connect with a generation who are desperately going to need this understanding, both of bias and of the technical aspects of what we all do. Yeah, I'm really interested in new ways we can do that, because I'm a bit annoyed with the school curriculum and the way the government supports teachers and all of that. I think we need to work collectively around it.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think the work that you're doing as a science communicator, as an advocate, somehow on top of your day job as a very successful scientist is just amazing to me. And I can completely agree with you about needing to kind of work with schools and work with teachers and try not only combat, the systemic underfunding and issues to do with teaching in this country, but also, like something that actually Eleanor and I are doing with Nomi, who is our youth inclusion consultant on the podcast, is that we're actually working with the OCR, the UK exam board, to be bringing in sort of an AI ethics syllabus and bringing work around tech ethics to a school level kind of age group and population, so that we can hopefully work towards kind of building this super digitally ethical kind of literate group of students in the kind of next cohort in the UK.
One more question.
I
know our time is nearly up. But on that side, do you also think about it from a university perspective? Because I went on a panel a couple of weeks ago, and it was talking about ethics and science. So, whether science was political, whether it could ever be neutral. And I think it's very hard to criticize people in computing for not considering it if you've never told them it's important to consider.
Totally.
So is it an undergrad thing as well? It's not just a high school thing?
Undergrad's really hard to change. I think we got so lucky with this OCR thing. So they're an exam board, and we're working with them particularly on the English language syllabus, which is where they wanted new texts. But to reach out to the exam boards who are doing computer science, the thing is, it's now still a module for most computer science courses. There'll be like 1 week of AI ethics, and all the undergrads I talk to are like, yeah, we did our ethics week and now we're ethical, and just kind of make fun of it. So that's a real shame. And that's really something we'd like to look into, because we can't just rely on stuff like this podcast or the stuff we put out there or people writing or other kinds of resources that you can engage with if you're already interested. And then, as you say, criticize engineers later down the line for not thinking about these kinds of things when they were never taught to.
I think that sounds fantastic. Yeah, we need it to be part of the accreditation. I think if you're going to teach computer science or physics, it needs to be that this whole systems approach is part of the way that we accredit degrees, that universities can't deliver them unless they're considering it more than just, I have my ethics day. Yeah, I know. I've spoken to so many students who are like, yeah, we had that professor. We had the ethics day. I'm ethical now. I'm not cheating.
It's been genuinely just such a pleasure to get to talk to you. And I certainly know I'm going to be going onto Wikipedia and doing a deep dive into lots of people's pages tonight. Maybe instead of watching TV, maybe as well as watching TV. But yeah, thank you so much for all the work that you do. And it's really been such a joy to get to chat.
Oh yeah, it was so much fun. Thank you for taking the time and for inviting me on. And I look forward to listening to it along with the others.
This episode was made possible thanks to the generosity of Christina Gore and the MacArthur Foundation. It was produced by Eleanor Drage and Kerry McInerney and edited by Eleanor Drage.